Before humanity fired a single shot, the galaxy had already sentenced it to death. The Dominion believed Earth was just another unstable species to erase. But at 3:11 Coordinated Solar Time, when every screen went black, humanity's strangest war began.
The extinction order reached Earth at exactly 3:11 Coordinated Solar Time, and for 17 full seconds, every screen on the planet went black. Not glitched, not interrupted, black. Air traffic control lost visual telemetry. Orbital stations lost navigation feeds. Financial systems froze mid-transaction. Emergency services stopped receiving signals. In Tokyo, traffic lights died simultaneously across 11 districts. In Lagos, a surgeon watched his operating room monitors shut off in the middle of an open-heart procedure. On the Martian shipyards, welders stared upward as the construction lattice surrounding Dock Ring 9 powered down section by section like a city losing consciousness. Then the message appeared. Not translated. Not interpreted. Every human being heard it in their own language instantly, spoken in a calm voice completely devoid of anger. Human civilization has exceeded acceptable instability thresholds. Predictive models indicate a 93.8% probability of future systemic contagion. By unanimous Dominion decree, the species-designated Terran is scheduled for erasure in 72 standard hours. No demands followed. No negotiation terms. No threats. Only coordinates. Every inhabited human world. Every orbital colony. Every shipyard. Every military station. Marked in cold white light against the darkness of space. And beneath them one final sentence. Do not resist. Resistance increases corrective severity. Across the galaxy, billions watched the transmission through Dominion relay networks with the quiet detachment people reserved for disasters happening far away from them. The Dominion Collective had ruled known space for over 4,000 years. Entire civilizations had vanished after receiving less. Most species surrendered before the countdown reached halfway. Humanity did something else. At Lunar Command Station Perseus, Admiral Elias Ward listened to the transmission once, reached over calmly, and muted the audio before the final sentence finished speaking. Then he looked past the tactical display toward Earth hanging beyond the observation glass, blue and silent beneath scattered cloud systems. Seal civilian archives, he said. Nobody in the command center moved at first. Not because they were shocked, because the order made no sense. His operations officer blinked. Sir, every museum, historical server, public library, colonial record vault, educational network. Lock them down now. Quantum isolation only. Priority level black. The room remained frozen for another heartbeat. Outside the station, warning sirens finally began echoing across orbital sectors. On Earth, panic was starting. Markets crashed in 13 nations simultaneously. Religious broadcasts flooded the global networks. Emergency bunkers opened beneath major cities. Long-range observatories confirmed the impossible truth unfolding at the edge of the solar system. The Dominion fleet was already moving. Thousands of ships. Maybe more. Nobody could get a clean count because Dominion vessels distorted sensor readings simply by existing nearby. And yet, the first strategic order humanity issued had nothing to do with weapons. Not fleet mobilization. Not planetary defense. History. Preserve the history first. Deep inside the Dominion flagship Ascendancy of Silence, senior predictive analyst Sarek watched Earth's response feed with growing discomfort. Around him, Dominion commanders observed the unfolding panic with practiced indifference. They had seen this pattern before. Initial chaos, leadership fracture, resource collapse, surrender negotiations within 30 hours. The algorithm predicted human capitulation at 79% probability before first engagement. Sarek was no longer convinced. He replayed the footage from Lunar Command again. Not the speech. Not the military movements. The faces. Humans were afraid. Of course they were afraid. Their biometric readings showed elevated cortisol, adrenal spikes, respiratory instability across every monitored population center. But underneath the fear, there was something else. something the Dominion systems did not know how to classify. The humans were organizing too quickly, not around survival, around continuity. Their networks were rerouting educational data into deep space relays. Civilian engineers were receiving emergency priority clearance ahead of politicians. Entire university systems had disappeared from public grids less than 20 minutes after the extinction order. It was not the behavior of a species preparing to die. It was the behavior of a species preparing to endure something. Sarek felt the first real unease of his career settle quietly into his chest. Then another transmission arrived from Earth. Short, unencrypted, public. Every Dominion ship received it simultaneously. The message contained only 7 words. Humanity acknowledges the countdown. Stand by. One of the Dominion commanders laughed softly. Sarek did not, because buried beneath the transmission metadata was something so strange, so irrational, that he checked it 3 separate times to make sure it was real. At the exact moment humanity sent the message, Earth had voluntarily shut down 30% of its own planetary defense grid, and no one could explain why.
So far, Earth has received a 72-hour extinction order from the Dominion Collective. Panic has erupted across human worlds, and Admiral Elias Ward's first command was not to arm missiles, but to preserve history. Meanwhile, senior analyst Sarek is already sensing something wrong. Humanity is afraid, yes, but it is also organizing around continuity. And now Earth has voluntarily shut down 30% of its defenses. Why would a doomed species weaken itself before the first shot? The Dominion is about to learn that humanity is not preparing to surrender, it is preparing to change the rules.
For the first 12 hours after the extinction order, the Dominion Collective observed humanity with the calm certainty of an empire watching gravity operate. The Dominion did not merely conquer civilizations, predicted them. That was the foundation of 4,000 years of uninterrupted expansion. Long before their fleets entered a system, the Dominion's vast predictive engines had already modeled every likely resistance pattern, every political fracture point, every military doctrine, every panic response. Entire wars were won mathematically before the first ship crossed a border. Most species believed they were making choices. The Dominion knew they were following probabilities. That certainty had become doctrine. Doctrine had become identity. And identity, over enough centuries, became something far more dangerous than arrogance. It became assumption. Deep beneath the armored surface of the ascendancy of silence, the predictive core processed humanity continuously. Entire chambers glowed with layered simulations of Earth's economic systems, psychological profiles, military logistics, social cohesion patterns, and historical conflict data. Trillions of variables moved through the machine every second. Projected resistance duration, 43 days. Probability of organized military collapse after first orbital strikes, 88%. Probability of internal human fragmentation before day 30, 92%. Probability of extinction completion, certain. Senior analyst Sarek stood alone in observation vault 7 studying those projections while unease continued tightening inside him like a slow mechanical failure. Because the numbers were changing. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone else to care yet. But they were changing. Human capitulation probability had dropped 3% in 6 hours. That should not have been possible. Species under existential pressure became more predictable, not less. Fear simplified behavior. Panic narrowed options. The predictive systems became more accurate during crises because intelligent organisms naturally prioritize survival. Humans were diverging instead. Every hour they behaved less consistently. On Earth, civilian traffic jams clogged evacuation corridors while, simultaneously, volunteer construction groups began reinforcing infrastructure around cities not projected to survive the opening assault. Religious violence erupted in 2 regions while neighboring populations organized massive food distribution systems with almost impossible efficiency. Millions attempted to flee major population centers while millions more moved toward them. Contradictory behavior. Chaotic behavior. Human behavior. Sarek isolated one particular feed from the North American continental zone. Thousands of civilians stood in line outside a government recruitment center that had not yet officially opened military enlistment. Some brought luggage. Some brought tools. One elderly woman carried gardening equipment. The predictive engine labeled the footage irrational. Sarek replayed it anyway. "What are you seeing?" The voice behind him belonged to Fleet Marshal Tovin, Supreme Commander of the Extinction Campaign. He moved with the relaxed confidence of someone whose species had not experienced military uncertainty in 30 generations. Sarek hesitated carefully. The human response patterns are dispersing outside expected parameters. Tovin glanced once at the projections. Fear destabilization. No, Marshal. Not destabilization. Diversification. Tovin looked mildly amused. Explain the difference. Sarek expanded several overlapping behavioral charts across the chamber. Most civilizations narrow under extinction pressure. Their decision-making becomes centralized, predictable. Humans are doing the opposite. Their responses are becoming more decentralized every hour. That would weaken coordination. It should, Sarek admitted quietly. The problem was hidden inside that word, should, because despite the apparent disorder, humanity's actual strategic efficiency was increasing. Military shipyards on Mars had exceeded emergency production projections by 20% already. Civilian transport networks were reorganizing supply chains without central oversight. Educational institutions had begun openly distributing advanced engineering archives to public networks. Millions of ordinary citizens were voluntarily solving logistical problems the Dominion expected governments to handle. The machine predicted fragmentation. Instead, humanity was multiplying effort. Tovin folded his hands behind his back. "You are concerned." Sarek chose his next words carefully. "I believe humanity may possess adaptive traits our models have insufficiently categorized." The fleet marshal smiled faintly. "Every new species appears unique until pressure is applied. Then they become understandable." Normally, Sarek would have agreed. But humanity's historical files still lingered in his memory. He had spent 3 years studying them after first contact. Not because humans were powerful. They were not. Their territory was small. Their fleet outdated. Their political systems chaotic. Their internal history violently unstable. But again and again, across thousands of years, the same impossible pattern appeared. Human civilizations survived events that should have ended them. Economic collapse, global war, environmental catastrophe, near extinction, repeatedly. And every time they emerged from disaster, they adapted faster afterward. The Dominion archives classified this as persistence. Sarek was beginning to suspect persistence was the wrong word. Meanwhile, inside Lunar Command Station Perseus, Admiral Elias Ward stood before a wall-sized tactical display tracking the incoming Dominion advance. Thousands of hostile signatures moved toward human territory in absolute formation precision. The fleet looked less like an armada and more like a machine assembling itself in motion. Commander Vale watched beside him silently. Unlike Ward, Vale looked exactly like a man staring at extinction. Exhausted eyes, unshaven jaw, uniform sleeves rolled carelessly past his wrists. He commanded the aging carrier Resolute and most of what remained of Earth's deep-range fleet. 38 combat-capable ships, against an empire whose scouting formations alone exceeded that number. "They're slowing," Vale said quietly. Ward nodded once. The Dominion fleet had reduced acceleration by 0.7% 3 hours earlier. Such a minor adjustment would have escaped most tactical systems. Humanity had noticed immediately. "Why?" Vale asked. Ward zoomed in on the tactical display. "Because they're studying us. And because they think time helps them." Vale stared at him for a moment. "Doesn't it?" Ward finally looked away from the tactical projections. There was something strange in his expression then. Not confidence. Not optimism. Calculation. "Commander," he said calmly, "how long would humanity survive in a conventional war against the Dominion?" Vale answered instantly. "Not long. And how long if the war stops being conventional? Vale frowned slightly. What exactly are we doing? For the first time since the transmission arrived, Ward smiled. It was not a reassuring expression. We are going to teach the most powerful civilization in the galaxy, he said softly. Why human history is full of mistakes we survived. An alarm suddenly flashed across the command center. Incoming transmission intercept. Dominion reconnaissance drones had breached the outer Ort defense perimeter far ahead of schedule. The tactical officers began speaking over one another as new contacts appeared across the display. But Sarek, standing light years away aboard the Ascendancy, never saw those alerts first. He saw something else. A hidden data stream buried beneath Earth's military communications. At first he thought it was corruption. Then he realized what humanity had done. The Terrans were leaking tactical information deliberately. Not enough to expose their plans. Just enough to be found. And somehow, impossibly, that frightened him more than if they had hidden everything. The first Dominion ships crossed into human territory on the 18th hour of the countdown. They arrived without spectacle. No triumphant broadcast. No declaration of superiority. No dramatic formations visible against the stars. Dominion warfare had evolved past theatricality thousands of years ago. The Empire considered intimidation inefficient when certainty accomplished the same thing faster. 3 reconnaissance clusters emerged beyond the orbit of Neptune and spread outward with machine precision, each vessel maintaining identical distance intervals as though connected by invisible architecture. Then human sensors lost track of half of them. Not because the ships disappeared, because the Dominion's distortion fields bent space itself just enough to corrupt targeting resolution. Human tactical screens flickered with impossible duplicate contacts. Ships appeared in 2 places at once. Entire formations shifted positions between sensor sweeps. The Dominion did not merely invade space. It invaded comprehension. On the bridge of the carrier Resolute, Commander Vale watched the corrupted tactical feed stabilize and felt a cold heaviness settle into his stomach. They're not even trying to hide anymore, one officer whispered. No, Vale replied quietly. They're trying to be seen. The distinction mattered. Predators hid when they feared resistance. The Dominion wanted humanity to watch the fleet coming. Every civilian network across Earth now carried public visualizations of the incoming armada. Billions watched silent formations glide through the outer darkness with terrifying calmness. The enemy did not accelerate, did not maneuver aggressively, did not posture. They moved with the confidence of something that had already calculated the outcome. Panic deepened in some regions. Entire financial systems collapsed outright. Suicide hotlines overloaded across multiple colonies. Religious leaders proclaimed the end of civilization in 1,000 different ways. And yet, beneath the fear, another current had begun moving through human space. Factories stayed lit through the night. Civilian shipping lanes remained active despite military advisories. Emergency engineering forums grew so overloaded with volunteer traffic that universities began converting entertainment servers into logistical coordination hubs. Millions of people who would never hold weapons started searching for other ways to matter. The Dominion noticed none of this as strategically significant. Sarek did. Inside Observation Vault 7, he watched human civilian networks evolve hour by hour into something increasingly difficult to model. No central authority appeared to control the process. Information spread laterally instead of hierarchically. Solutions emerged from disconnected populations simultaneously. The predictive engine categorized the phenomenon as decentralized stress behavior. But Sarek kept returning to the same troubling observation. It was working. Human adaptation speed had increased 31% since first contact. That should not have been possible under escalating existential pressure. A Dominion officer entered the vault abruptly. Initial engagement confirmed. Sarek turned toward the tactical displays. The first battle lasted 4 minutes. Near the orbit of Uranus, 12 Terran defense frigates intercepted an advancing Dominion reconnaissance cluster. Human ships accelerated directly toward the enemy formation, fired one coordinated barrage, destroyed nothing, and immediately retreated in complete disarray. At least that was how it appeared initially. Dominion tactical projections adjusted instantly. Human military discipline, poor. Formation cohesion, unstable. Morale confidence, degrading. Probability of organized resistance collapse increased by 6%. Fleet Marshal Toven barely glanced at the engagement summary before dismissing it entirely. Expected, he said. But Sarek kept studying the battle replay. Something bothered him. The Terran ships had retreated too quickly. Not like frightened crews. More like vessels leaving deliberately timed positions. He replayed the engagement again. Then again. Finally, he isolated the Dominion fleet telemetry. The Terrans had not targeted the reconnaissance ships themselves. They had targeted sensor synchronization intervals. Not damaging them, measuring them. Sarek felt unease sharpen further. Meanwhile, deeper inside the solar system, Commander Vale watched the same battle replay from aboard the Resolute. "You got your numbers?" Admiral Ward asked through encrypted comms. Vale nodded once. "Enough to start building patterns." "Good. Fall back to phase line 2. Vale muted the channel and stared at the tactical display. 38 ships. That was all humanity had committed to the opening engagement. Not because they lacked courage. Because Ward refused to let humanity fight the war the Dominion expected. The old admiral had spent the last 18 hours doing something that bordered on madness. Instead of concentrating military force, he had intentionally dispersed it across civilian infrastructure, freight routes, mining colonies, educational systems, and orbital fabrication yards. Half the Terran fleet no longer resembled a fleet at all. It resembled noise. And somehow, impossibly, the noise was becoming organized. Another alert flashed across the bridge. New Dominion projections intercepted. Predicted Terran retreat vectors. Vale studied them silently. Then he laughed once under his breath. The Dominion had predicted exactly what humanity wanted them to predict. "Transmit updated routes," he ordered. One of his officers blinked. "Sir? Those aren't our actual withdrawal coordinates." "I know." The officer hesitated. "Then why send them?" Vale looked back toward the stars beyond the bridge glass, where invisible enemy ships were already advancing through the dark. "Because the Dominion believes information is control," he said quietly. "Let's see how much control they think they have after another day of this." Across human space, colonies began evacuating ahead of the advancing fleets. But the evacuations made little sense. Industrial equipment vanished before military stockpiles. Scientific archives disappeared before government officials. On Titan, civilian engineers dismantled an entire fusion grid before abandoning the colony. On Europa, agricultural stations destroyed their own transport ports after evacuating food reserves. The Dominion expected humanity to defend territory. Humanity kept stripping territory bare instead. Planet after planet became strategically hollow before occupation. And everywhere the Dominion advanced, they encountered the same infuriating pattern. The humans refused to defend predictably. Some fleets retreated immediately. Others attacked recklessly for minutes before disappearing into civilian traffic routes. Several colonies surrendered peacefully only for Dominion logistical systems to fail hours later because infrastructure databases had been rewritten into unusable chaos. Nothing aligned cleanly. Nothing behaved consistently. The predictive engines compensated continuously, recalculating probabilities billions of times per second. Yet, for the first time in recorded Dominion history, conflicting outcomes began appearing simultaneously inside the war models. Minor inconsistencies at first, then larger ones. Victory projections remained certain, but timelines began drifting apart. 38 days, 51, 74, 90. The machine could still see humanity losing. It could no longer clearly see how. Sarek stared at the fractured projections in silence while cold realization crept slowly through him. The Dominion had spent 4,000 years perfecting warfare against civilizations that tried to survive. Humanity appeared to be doing something else entirely. And whatever it was, the predictive engines were starting to choke on it. By the 5th day of the invasion, the Dominion Collective officially classified the war as operationally irregular. The phrase sounded harmless. Inside Dominion command structure, it was the closest equivalent to alarm. Fleet Marshal Toven stood beneath the towering tactical projection chamber aboard the Ascendancy of Silence while thousands of battle vectors shifted around him in cold blue light. Human space unfolded across the display like a fractured organism refusing to die correctly. 3 colonies had already fallen. 2 orbital defense rings were gone. 41 human ships had been destroyed or rendered inoperable. By every measurable standard, the Dominion was winning exactly as projected. And yet the war felt wrong. Every advance cost more time than predicted. Every occupation created fresh logistical complications. Human resistance appeared in places already declared pacified. Fleets withdrew from strategically valuable systems only to reappear days later against supply corridors hundreds of light-years away. The Dominion possessed overwhelming superiority in firepower. Humanity kept attacking certainty instead. Updated probability matrix, Toven ordered. The predictive chamber responded instantly. Extinction success remained absolute. But the completion timelines fractured wider again. 92 days. 141. 206. Toven stared at the expanding spread in silence. Behind him, several Dominion commanders exchanged uneasy glances before quickly suppressing them. Dominion officers were trained from birth to trust the predictive systems completely. Those systems had governed military doctrine for longer than most civilizations survived. Now the machine was hesitating, not failing, hesitating. And hesitation in Dominion philosophy was contamination. Senior Analyst Sarek entered the chamber carrying fresh behavioral reports. He had not slept in 32 hours, though Dominion physiology required less rest than humans. The exhaustion visible beneath his eyes came from something else. He was beginning to understand humanity. That frightened him more than the war. The Terrans abandoned Callisto Station, one commander announced sharply as Sarek approached. Without resistance. Another officer snorted softly. Their collapse accelerates. Sarek remained silent, because he had reviewed the Callisto evacuation personally. Humanity had abandoned the station, yes. After stripping it of every useful component. After rerouting civilian manufacturing assets. After evacuating educational archives. After flooding the remaining infrastructure with corrupted engineering data designed to sabotage Dominion integration systems. The Dominion occupied the station 12 hours ago. They still could not restore basic functionality. It was not retreat. It was denial warfare. Humans refused to let the enemy inherit momentum. Toven finally turned toward Sarek. Your assessment. Sarek activated the behavioral overlays. Human strategic adaptation continues accelerating, he said carefully. They are not attempting territorial defense. They are reshaping operational conditions. One commander laughed openly. By losing, Sarek met his gaze evenly. By choosing how they lose. Silence followed that statement, because suddenly everyone in the room understood the implication. Humanity was controlling the shape of defeat. And anything controlling the shape of defeat might eventually control something else. Toven studied the projections another moment. Explain the predictive degradation. Sarek hesitated only briefly. The Dominion systems are optimized against centralized resistance structures. Human civilization is becoming less centralized under pressure, not more. Another officer frowned. That should reduce efficiency. It should, Sarek admitted again. That word returned like a wound. Should. Human systems were becoming increasingly unstable individually while growing strangely resilient collectively. Civilian populations adapted to disruption faster than Dominion projections could account for. Human command structures changed tactics between engagements with almost reckless flexibility. They did not preserve doctrine. They abandoned it instantly when conditions changed. The Dominion considered that primitive. But primitive systems evolved quickly. Toven's expression hardened slightly. Then we increase pressure. Sarek felt something cold settle deeper inside him, because that was exactly what humanity wanted. Meanwhile, near the orbit of Saturn, Commander Vale guided the battered Resolute through the wreckage of a destroyed supply convoy while repair crews welded emergency plating across the carrier's lower hull. The ship looked exhausted. So did its crew. 5 days of continuous retreat and strike warfare had transformed the fleet into something barely recognizable as organized military structure. Half the tactical maneuvers now originated from improvised field decisions rather than central command. Civilian freighters carried ammunition. Mining vessels acted as reconnaissance screens. University navigation departments calculated slipstream routes faster than military systems could process them. The Dominion thought humanity was becoming chaotic. Humanity was becoming fluid. Vale stepped onto the bridge just as another encrypted transmission from Admiral Ward arrived. Status. Vale rubbed tired eyes before answering. We lost the Nairobi and the Huxley. Dominion supply lines rerouted faster than expected. Ward nodded once through the projection. He looked older than he had 5 days earlier. We anticipated adaptation. They're getting aggressive. No, Ward corrected quietly. They're getting emotional. Vale frowned slightly. Ward expanded several tactical overlays onto the channel. Dominion fleet movements shifted across the display in overlapping patterns. At first they advanced mathematically, the Admiral said. Now they're advancing personally. Vale studied the projections. He saw it then. Tiny deviations. The Dominion had begun overcommitting force against harassment attacks. Entire formations shifted disproportionately to pursue small Terran strike groups. Supply fleets received heavier escorts than operational logic justified. The enemy was becoming irritated. And irritation created inefficiency. Pressure reveals personality, Ward continued calmly. Doesn't matter whether you're talking about individuals or empires. Vale leaned back slowly. You're trying to provoke them. I'm trying to force them to improvise. That sentence lingered in silence between them. Because the Dominion did not improvise. They optimized. Optimization created strength. But it also created rigidity. Ward finally lowered his voice slightly. Commander, do you know what scares the Dominion most? Vale almost laughed. I assumed nothing. That's exactly the problem. The transmission ended abruptly as emergency alarms flared across the Resolute. Incoming contacts. Dozens. Vale moved instantly toward the tactical displays while bridge officers shouted overlapping reports. Dominion interceptors had appeared ahead of schedule again. But something else caught his attention immediately. Their formation was wrong. Not strategically wrong. Emotionally wrong. Too aggressive. Too fast. The enemy was beginning to chase. And somewhere deep inside the Dominion predictive core, hidden beneath trillions of calculations and certainty engines, a new designation quietly appeared for the first time in 4,000 years. Evolutionary contamination risk. Human. Threat escalation recommended. Containment urgency increasing. The machine had stopped viewing humanity as a civilization. It was beginning to view humanity as an infection. On the 12th day of the war, humanity abandoned Vega Colony. Not lost. Abandoned. The distinction stunned the galaxy. Vega was not some distant mining outpost or disposable frontier station. It was one of humanity's largest extrasolar population centers, home to nearly 80 million civilians and 3 major industrial shipyards. Dominion tactical models had identified it as a probable last stand location weeks earlier. Instead, when the Dominion fleet arrived, they found the colony dark. No orbital defenses. No fleet formations. No planetary broadcasts. Entire cities sat silent beneath cloud cover while automated landing beacons continued blinking into empty skies. Fleet Marshal Tovin ordered immediate occupation. 3 hours later, Dominion engineers discovered the truth. The humans had taken everything. Factories gutted down to foundational support beams. Fusion cores removed. Agricultural systems dismantled. Data centers physically destroyed after archives vanished into encrypted deep space relays. Even atmospheric processors had been stripped for portable components before evacuation. Humanity had not defended Vega because humanity no longer cared about holding ground. They cared about movement. They cared about time. And most dangerously of all, they cared about denying certainty. What kind of species evacuates an entire world in 11 days? One Dominion commander demanded in disbelief. Sarek knew the answer before anyone else spoke. The kind that decided survival matters more than pride. But even as he said it, another realization settled beneath the first. Humanity had evacuated too efficiently. 80 million civilians should have created chaos on a scale visible across the entire sector. Dominion predictive systems had projected riots, transportation collapse, violent resource competition, command breakdown. Instead, Vega had emptied with terrifying speed. Not cleanly, not peacefully. Human evacuations remained visibly emotional, chaotic, imperfect. Families separated. Supply corridors overloaded. Civilian ships packed beyond regulation limits. But the movement never stopped. Millions of independent decisions somehow aligned toward the same objective without requiring centralized control. The Dominion systems did not know how to model that. Inside Lunar Command Station Perseus, Admiral Ward watched confirmation of Vega's evacuation arrive across tactical screens while exhausted officers around him processed the consequences. "We just surrendered the fourth largest colony in human space," one commander said quietly. "No," Ward replied. He enlarged the latest Dominion fleet movement projections. "We redirected the war." The room fell silent, because suddenly everyone could see it. The Dominion fleet was no longer advancing efficiently toward Earth. It was spreading. Occupation forces remained behind to stabilize hollow colonies. Supply corridors stretched wider every day. Fleets diverted repeatedly to secure systems humanity no longer intended to hold. The Dominion believed conquest required ownership. Humanity kept turning ownership into a burden. Commander Vale arrived through encrypted channel transmission from the Resolute, his face pale from exhaustion. "Outer refugee convoys reached Mars orbit," he reported. "Civilian transfer estimates exceeded projections by 30%. Ward nodded once. "And the Dominion?" Vale almost smiled. "They're slowing. Not dramatically, not visibly, but the changes were becoming measurable now. Dominion formations paused longer before entering abandoned systems. Fleet synchronization intervals widened slightly during pursuit operations. Supply chain efficiency dropped 0.4% after Vega alone. Tiny numbers, insignificant numbers, until someone understood what humanity was actually attacking. The Dominion did not rule the galaxy through military power alone. It ruled through predictive certainty, and certainty required stability. Humanity was poisoning stability. Far from the front lines on Earth itself, another transformation had begun unfolding beneath the fear and panic. The war had stopped feeling military. It was becoming personal. Public engineering networks operated continuously across all major cities. Civilian volunteers repaired orbital infrastructure between bombardment alerts. Independent scientific groups began solving tactical problems faster than military research divisions could process them. A university professor on Luna developed a new method for masking thermal signatures using commercial cargo plating. A civilian logistics analyst on Mars identified exploitable delays inside Dominion supply synchronization algorithms. Neither had military training. Both solutions reached the fleet within hours. The Dominion believed wars were fought by armies. Humanity had turned itself into the war. And then, on the 19th day, the Dominion Predictive Core suffered its first major fracture. It happened during the assault on the Perseus corridor. 3 Terran fleets appeared simultaneously across separate sectors. Dominion models identified one as the real attack vector and committed interception forces accordingly. All 3 fleets were real. The Terrans intentionally sacrificed one task force, redirected the second mid-engagement, and used civilian transport traffic to conceal the third until Dominion supply stations were already under assault. The predictive engines recalculated continuously. Projected outcomes multiplied instead of narrowing. For the first time in recorded history, Dominion tactical systems produced contradictory strategic recommendations simultaneously. Advance. Withdraw. Consolidate. Pursue. The machine no longer understood which future humanity intended to create. Warning glyphs flashed across the predictive chambers aboard the Ascendancy of Silence as simulation branches spiraled uncontrollably into divergence. Probability fragmentation exceeded acceptable thresholds. Strategic certainty collapse, risk increasing. Fleet Marshal Toven stared at the warnings in growing disbelief. "Stabilize the models," he ordered sharply. The systems obeyed, then fractured again, because the problem was no longer computational. It was human. Sarek stood motionless as realization finally arrived in full. The Dominion had misunderstood humanity from the beginning. Humans were not defeating prediction because they were irrational. Humans were defeating prediction because they adapted socially faster than any centralized system could track. The Dominion's predictive intelligence worked by identifying stable behavioral patterns and exploiting them. Humanity kept changing patterns before exploitation cycles completed. Every battle taught humans something new. Every loss spread information faster. Every civilian contribution altered strategic conditions again. The Dominion had spent thousands of years perfecting war against species that preserved structure under pressure. Humanity evolved under pressure instead. And evolution was impossible to predict permanently. Then the impossible happened. The predictive core itself issued a restricted-level recommendation directly to Dominion High Command. Notification. Continued engagement increases human adaptive capability exponentially. Projected long-term outcome divergence exceeds stability parameters. Recommended action. Disengage. For several seconds, nobody in the chamber spoke. Because the machine that had guided 4,000 years of conquest had just advised retreat from a species with fewer than 300 combat-capable ships. Fleet Marshal Toven read the recommendation twice, then very calmly reached forward and disabled the alert manually. "No," he said softly. Sarek felt cold certainty settle into his chest. That single word terrified him more than the war, because now the Dominion was no longer fighting to eliminate humanity.
The war has transformed. Humanity has abandoned colonies like Vega, hollowed out its own worlds, turned civilians into strategists, and forced the Dominion's scared predictive engines to recommend retreat. But Fleet Marshal Towan refuses to accept the answer. This is the emotional turning point. The Dominion is no longer acting from certainty, but from pride. And when an empire fights to prove it cannot be wrong, the next move may become more dangerous than extinction itself.
It was fighting to prove the machine could not be wrong. And civilizations that fought for pride instead of survival became dangerous in ways prediction could never fully measure. Fleet Marshal Toven committed the reserve fleets on the 21st day of the war. Across occupied sectors, Dominion relay stations transmitted the mobilization order with absolute priority clearance. Thousands of dormant warships stationed along border territories changed course simultaneously, their engines igniting across the darkness like entire constellations coming alive. The galaxy noticed. Neutral civilizations that had spent centuries carefully avoiding Dominion attention watched military traffic on a scale not seen in recorded history. Trade corridors froze. Diplomatic channels flooded with speculation. Entire governments quietly began preparing contingency plans they had never before considered necessary. Because empires did not mobilize reserves unless something had gone wrong. And nothing had gone wrong for the Dominion in 4,000 years. Inside the Ascendancy of Silence, the predictive chambers pulsed with unstable projections as new fleet integrations flooded the system. Strategic certainty percentages climbed upward again under the weight of overwhelming numbers. 6,000 Dominion vessels now moved toward human space. Extinction projections stabilized. Victory timelines narrowed. The machine was regaining confidence. Fleet Marshal Toven finally allowed himself the smallest measure of relief. "Pressure resolves instability," one commander said approvingly while watching the updated models. Sarek remained silent, because he was no longer studying the numbers. He was studying humanity, and humanity was changing faster than the Dominion understood. Every additional fleet the Dominion committed created more fronts, more logistical strain, more occupied systems requiring stabilization. Human resistance no longer concentrated around military engagements. It spread through infrastructure, information, adaptation, and disruption. The Dominion kept trying to end the war militarily. Humanity had transformed the war into an ecosystem. That realization became impossible to ignore after the fall of Titan. Dominion forces secured the moon after a 6-hour orbital engagement that destroyed most remaining Terran defenses in the sector. Officially, the operation was categorized as a decisive victory. Then the fuel systems failed. Not catastrophically, subtly. Refinement output dropped 3% across occupied infrastructure. Then 6. Then 12. Diagnostic systems revealed nothing mechanically wrong. Dominion engineers spent 19 hours tracing the issue before discovering the cause. Human civilian technicians had rewritten industrial calibration algorithms weeks earlier. The systems still functioned, just inefficiently enough to compound across supply networks. The sabotage cost humanity nothing. The consequences spread across 3 Dominion sectors. That same day, civilian astronomers on Earth identified exploitable weaknesses in Dominion distortion fields by comparing battle footage against stellar lensing patterns. The discovery reached Terran fleets in under 4 hours. Human targeting accuracy improved immediately afterward. No military research division authorized the breakthrough. A retired physics teacher did. Again and again, the same pattern emerged. The Dominion fought with hierarchy. Humanity fought with participation. Commander Vale felt the difference everywhere now. The Resolute drifted through the wreckage of another engagement near the Europa corridor, while repair drones crawled across the carrier's scarred hull. The ship no longer resembled a formal military vessel. Half its systems had been modified beyond regulation standards. Civilian software patches controlled portions of the targeting matrix. Volunteer engineering collectives from Earth transmitted repair solutions faster than onboard technicians could request them. None of it should have worked together. It worked anyway. Vale stood on the bridge watching New Dominion reserve formations enter the system when his communications officer spoke quietly. "Sir, there's another public transmission." "From who?" The officer hesitated. "Everyone." Vale frowned slightly as the transmission flooded tactical channels. Not military frequencies, civilian ones. Millions of human voices. Recorded messages from colonies, cities, refugee convoys, universities, hospitals, mining crews, orbital stations. Short transmissions poured into fleet networks continuously. "We're still here." Supplies outbound from Luna. New heat sink schematics uploaded. Mars volunteers requesting deployment routes. Agricultural reserves rerouted successfully. Tell the fleet to keep fighting. None of the messages were coordinated. That was what made them powerful. The Dominion intercepted every transmission. And for the first time, Dominion analysts began struggling with something they had never needed to measure before: collective morale that increased under pressure. Normally prolonged war exhausted civilizations into predictability. Humanity became more connected, more adaptive, more dangerous. A Dominion commander reviewing civilian transmissions finally voiced the question spreading quietly through the fleet. How are they sustaining this? No one answered, because the answer was becoming disturbingly obvious. Humans were not enduring the war despite participation. They were enduring because of participation. Meanwhile, hidden deep beneath Lunar Command, Admiral Ward studied the newest strategic projections with bloodshot eyes and growing concern. The Dominion reserve fleets changed everything. Humanity had succeeded in slowing the invasion, destabilizing prediction systems, and stretching Dominion logistics beyond expected limits. But numbers still mattered eventually. And now the numbers were monstrous again. 6,000 warships. Enough firepower to sterilize entire systems. Commander Vale appeared through encrypted transmission moments later. "You've seen the reserve deployments." Ward nodded once. "They're done underestimating us." Vale leaned back heavily. "Then what's the plan?" Ward did not answer immediately. That alone unsettled Vale more than anything else. The Admiral always had an answer. Finally, Ward activated a classified tactical layer hidden beneath the broader strategic projections. Vale stared at it in silence. "No," he said quietly. We may not have a choice. Displayed across the tactical map were sealed contingency protocols humanity had prepared long before first contact with the Dominion. Fail-safe systems, last resort systems, weapons that had never been activated because no sane civilization would willingly deploy them. Vale looked back up slowly. You really think it could come to this? Ward's expression remained unreadable. I think the Dominion still believes this war has a floor. Outside Lunar Command, Earth rotated silently beneath scattered sunlight and storm systems, beautiful and fragile, and completely unaware of the exact moment its survival calculations had crossed into terrifying territory. Because hidden across human space now, beneath civilian infrastructure and buried deep inside decentralized quantum networks, humanity had begun preparing something the Dominion predictive engines had never encountered before. Not a fleet, not a superweapon, a contingency designed by a species that had spent 10,000 years surviving its own worst instincts. And if humanity activated it, the war would end. But the galaxy afterward might never recover. The Dominion sterilization protocols activated on the 34th day of the war. There was no dramatic announcement, no ultimatum. The order moved quietly through encrypted military channels as 6,000 Dominion warships repositioned around the outer edge of the solar system with terrifying precision. Entire formations shifted away from occupation patterns and into containment geometry. Earth disappeared beneath targeting grids so dense they resembled a second atmosphere. Commander Vale watched the tactical overlays spread across the bridge of the Resolute and felt something inside him go cold. They're preparing extinction fire. No one answered him, because everyone already knew. The Dominion had reached the same conclusion humanity feared most. Conventional victory was no longer guaranteed. Human adaptation rates continued accelerating. Occupied sectors grew increasingly unstable. Predictive certainty had degraded beyond acceptable thresholds. The Dominion no longer intended to conquer humanity. It intended to erase the problem before it evolved further. Across Earth, emergency broadcasts interrupted civilian networks simultaneously. Cities entered blackout conditions. Orbital evacuation corridors overloaded within minutes. Religious gatherings flooded public spaces while military transports screamed overhead toward defense positions already considered mathematically hopeless. And still humanity kept moving. Factories remained active. Research hubs stayed online. Civilian logistics systems continued rerouting supplies toward the fleet even as extinction projections spread openly across every public network. People were terrified, but they were still helping. That was the part Sarek could no longer emotionally process. From inside Observation Vault 7 aboard the Ascendancy of Silence, he watched human-civilian traffic patterns continue functioning under annihilation conditions. Not perfectly. Never perfectly. Panic surged everywhere. Violence erupted across overcrowded refugee sectors. Infrastructure failures spread through exhausted colonies. Yet somehow the species continued organizing itself faster than collapse could fully spread. Dominion doctrine had no category for this. No civilization should have remained operational under this level of pressure. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. Priority transmission request. Unauthorized. Encrypted through 3 abandoned civilian channels. Sarek opened it cautiously. Admiral Elias Ward appeared on the screen. For several seconds, neither spoke. The human admiral looked exhausted beyond anything Sarek had seen in Dominion military culture. His uniform collar sat partially open. His eyes were bloodshot. Behind him, tactical officers moved through Lunar Command under dim emergency lighting while distant alarms echoed faintly through the transmission. "You shouldn't be contacting me," Sarek said finally. Ward nodded slightly. "Probably not. You know this channel is traceable." "I know." The calmness in his voice unsettled Sarek more than fear would have. Ward studied him quietly for a moment before speaking again. "You understand what your commanders are doing now." It was not phrased as a question. Sarek looked away briefly toward the tactical displays surrounding him. Sterilization formations continued locking into position across the solar system. "Yes," he admitted. "And you know why they're doing it." A pause. "Yes." because humanity had become unpredictable enough to threaten the Dominion's foundational assumption that all civilizations could eventually be controlled through sufficient pressure. The Dominion could not allow a successful contradiction to exist. Ward leaned back slightly, exhaustion visible in every movement now. Then you also know what happens next if this continues. Sarek hesitated, because he did know. Humanity would activate the contingency. The existence of that contingency remained one of the highest-level secrets in human space, but Dominion intelligence had uncovered fragments of it days earlier. Incomplete references, buried protocols, scattered scientific anomalies connected across decentralized quantum systems. At first, Dominion analysts thought humanity was constructing a last-resort weapon. Then they understood the scale. It was not a weapon against fleets. It was a weapon against prediction itself. A viral quantum cascade capable of corrupting the Dominion's central predictive architecture permanently across every connected system in the Empire. Not through destruction, through uncontrolled uncertainty. The cascade would spread through the same predictive infrastructure the Dominion relied upon to coordinate civilization itself. Logistics, navigation, environmental stabilization, food distribution, trade systems, orbital traffic, entire sectors of the galaxy depended on predictive synchronization. If the contingency activated, the Dominion would survive militarily. Its civilization might not. Billions of lives across hundreds of species could collapse into chaos. And humanity had built it anyway. Sarek finally looked back toward Ward. You would really deploy it? Ward's expression changed then. Not anger, not defiance, pain. We built it because extinction changes the math. The honesty of that answer struck harder than any threat could have. Ward continued quietly, but I haven't activated it yet. Yet. Because there's still a choice. Outside the transmission frame, alarms intensified somewhere inside Lunar Command. Neither acknowledged them. Sarek lowered his voice slightly. Fleet Marshal Toven believes pressure will eventually force human surrender. Ward almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was tragic. Your empire keeps misunderstanding us in the exact same way, he said softly. Humans surrender comfort. Humans surrender territory. Humans surrender certainty all the time. We survive by adapting. His eyes hardened slightly then. But we don't surrender the future. The transmission cut abruptly as emergency lockdown sirens erupted across Lunar Command. Moments later, tactical alerts flooded every Dominion battle screen simultaneously. Human fleets were mobilizing, not retreating, advancing. Commander Vale stood at the center of the Resolute's bridge while thousands of Terran ships, military, civilian-modified, improvised, half-repaired, moved into formation around Earth. The sight barely resembled a conventional fleet anymore. Mining vessels carried missile racks welded onto industrial hulls. Cargo transports operated as mobile repair depots. Civilian navigation ships coordinated tactical synchronization across millions of decentralized communication nodes. The Dominion had spent 34 days fighting humanity. Only now was it beginning to fight humanity together. Vale opened the fleet-wide channel. He expected fear. What he heard instead unsettled him in an entirely different way. Calm. Exhausted calm. Pilots checking coordinates. Engineers discussing reactor tolerances. Civilian crews requesting ammunition transfers. Someone asking whether coffee reserves still existed on Luna Station. Humanity sounded like people preparing for weather. And somewhere beneath the tactical chaos unfolding around Earth, buried inside quantum systems distributed across human space, the contingency waited silently. Ready. One authorization away from changing the galaxy forever. Then the final Dominion transmission arrived. Planetary sterilization countdown initiated. 4 hours to firing solution. The last battle for Earth began in complete silence. No speeches crossed the fleet channels. No final declarations echoed through the darkness. After 34 days of continuous war, humanity had burned through the emotional energy required for dramatic moments. What remained now was something older and harder. Resolve. Commander Vale stood on the bridge of the Resolute as thousands of Terran vessels accelerated toward the advancing Dominion formations. Around him, the tactical display looked impossible. Human ships filled every available vector across the inner solar system, moving in patterns no centralized doctrine could have designed. Because no centralized doctrine had. Every surviving lesson from 34 Days of War lived inside the fleet now. Civilian analysts fed targeting corrections directly into combat formations. Independent navigation groups recalculated attack vectors faster than military systems alone ever could. Damaged ships improvised maneuvers based on engineering solutions uploaded minutes earlier from universities and public research forums. The Dominion had spent centuries perfecting control. Humanity had weaponized participation. Sterilization countdown at 3 hours 41 minutes. An officer reported quietly. Vale nodded once. Then the Dominion fleet advanced. 6,000 warships moved as one vast mechanical organism toward Earth, their formations precise enough to make the stars themselves seem disordered by comparison. The opening bombardment lit the darkness across millions of kilometers as entire Terran defense grids vanished beneath concentrated fire. And humanity hit back immediately. Not at the center. At the edges. Human strike groups tore into synchronization relays, supply coordinators, targeting lattice hubs. Every Terran attack focused not on destruction, but disruption. Human fleets no longer tried to overpower the Dominion. They tried to overload its ability to respond coherently. On the bridge of the Ascendancy of Silence, Fleet Marshal Toven watched the engagement unfold with growing disbelief. The humans were faster now. Not physically, behaviorally. Dominion tactical systems identified vulnerabilities, generated responses, transmitted solutions, and by the time Dominion formations reacted, the humans had already shifted again. The adaptation cycle had become too short. Every engagement taught humanity in real time. Every mistake evolved instantly into strategy. Predictive confidence dropping. An officer warned sharply. Toven ignored him, because he could already see it happening. The Dominion fleet was slowing. Tiny delays at first. Formation adjustments taking seconds longer than projected. Coordination overlaps spreading between adjacent sectors. Supply relays hesitating under conflicting tactical recommendations. The machine was still functioning. But now it was thinking against an enemy that changed faster than certainty could stabilize. And then Commander Vale saw it. Not collapse. A crack. Near the outer edge of Mars' defense orbit, 3 Dominion formations attempted simultaneous restructuring after a coordinated Terran strike disabled their relay synchronization chain. Under normal conditions, the maneuver would have completed flawlessly. Instead, 2 sectors responded with contradictory positioning corrections. One formation shifted inward. Another compensated outward. A gap opened. Tiny. Temporary. Human eyes almost missed it. Human instinct did not. All fleets. Vale transmitted instantly. Voice calm despite the thunder inside his chest. Vector Blackstar. Full advance. Thousands of Terran ships moved at once. Not because Central Command ordered them to. Because they all saw the same thing. The Dominion machine had finally hesitated. The next 12 minutes changed galactic history. Human fleets drove into the widening fracture with terrifying precision. Civilian targeting networks flooded the battlespace with adaptive calculations faster than Dominion systems could suppress them. Independent strike groups exploited weaknesses before centralized Terran command even identified them formally. The Dominion kept trying to stabilize. Humanity kept evolving inside the stabilization. And slowly, impossibly, the great predictive empire began losing control of the future. Inside Lunar Command, Admiral Elias Ward watched the tactical displays while the contingency authorization codes waited open beside him. One command. One transmission. The Dominion predictive architecture across the galaxy would collapse permanently. The war would end. So would countless innocent systems tied to that architecture. An officer looked toward him desperately. Sir, if we deploy the cascade now, we survive, Ward finished quietly. The officer hesitated. Then why are we waiting? Ward looked past the tactical projections toward Earth turning silently beneath the station. Cities, Families. Ordinary people who had spent 34 days holding together a civilization under extinction pressure without surrendering what made it worth saving. Then he closed the authorization window. No, he said softly. Around him, exhausted officers stared in disbelief. Ward finally looked back toward the battle. If humanity survives this by becoming terrified of freedom, he said quietly, then the Dominion already wins. At that exact moment, Fleet Marshal Tovin reached the same conclusion from the opposite side of the war. He stood motionless aboard the Ascendancy while the tactical projections fractured wider across every display. Human adaptation had surpassed predictive containment thresholds entirely now. Every Dominion response generated more complexity. Every attempt to regain certainty accelerated instability further. And for the first time in 4,000 years, the Dominion had encountered something it could not outlast. Not militarily, philosophically. Humanity did not behave like a civilization seeking perfect order. It behaved like a civilization willing to survive uncertainty together. The predictive engines could not control that because the predictive engines themselves depended on stability to function. Tovin stared at the sterilization countdown ticking toward firing authorization. Then slowly, heavily, he understood something Sarek had been trying to warn him about since the beginning. Humanity was dangerous precisely because it never stopped changing. He turned toward the communications station. Open all channels. Several officers froze. Marshal! Now! The transmission spread across every human and Dominion frequency simultaneously. This is Fleet Marshal Tovin of the Dominion Collective. The battle continued raging behind the transmission. Ships still burned. People still died. But slowly, across both fleets, something began shifting as millions listened. The Dominion Collective recognizes Terran sovereignty and requests immediate ceasefire negotiations. Silence followed. Not because the battle stopped instantly, because nobody in the galaxy had ever heard the Dominion say those words before. On Earth, people looked upward from shelters, factories, hospitals, refugee centers, ruined cities, and overcrowded orbital stations as the transmission replayed across public networks. Humanity had survived, not by overpowering the galaxy's greatest empire, by forcing it to confront something stronger than certainty. Choice. Hours later, after the ceasefire protocols finalized and sterilization systems powered down, Admiral Ward transmitted humanity's conditions. No territorial conquest, no reparations, no revenge. Only 3 terms. Terran sovereignty recognized permanently. Independent oversight councils formed between species. And every civilization under Dominion control granted the right to choose its own future. When Fleet Marshal Tovin read the 3rd condition, he understood at last what truly separated humanity from every empire before it. Humans did not survive suffering by worshipping power. They survived by remembering what power was supposed to protect. Weeks later, as damaged ships drifted home through a quieter solar system, Commander Vale stood aboard the scarred Resolute, watching repair crews weld fresh plating across the battered hull. The war was over. The ship smelled like smoke, coolant, exhaustion, and burned circuitry. And somehow, underneath all of it, coffee. A young engineer passed him carrying repair tools and grinned tiredly. Dockmaster says she might actually fly straight again. Vale looked across the ship's wounded surface. 34 days ago, the Dominion had arrived believing humanity was a statistical correction waiting to happen. Now the galaxy was rewriting its future around a species that refused to let survival belong only to itself. Beyond the repair docks, Earth turned slowly beneath the stars. Old, scarred, alive. And for the first time in a very long time, the future no longer looked predictable.
In the end, humanity did not defeat the Dominion by becoming stronger than it. It survived by becoming less predictable, more connected, and more willing to adapt together. Admiral Ward refused to unleash the quantum cascade. Commander Vale saw the crack in the Dominion machine, and even Towan finally understood the truth. Power exists to protect the future, not to control it. The lesson is simple but profound. Civilians endure not because they eliminate uncertainty, but because they chose each other inside it.